You might be familiar with Kickstarter. It's a website where developers can showcase their ideas and seek additional funding to make those ideas a reality. There's been all kinds of games and hardware that were funded on Kickstarter. However, there's also been a few scams on the platform where the owner of the page might take the donations and run, or mislead people into backing a project that will never exist. One example of this would be subject to some major controversy. Let's take a look. I'm recording this at 2 a.m. right now. What's going on, guys? It's Podrez, coming at you with another video. Alright, so we've gotten to this point. We're going to be talking about the Coleco Chameleon. Alright, so if you're new to the channel and you like what I do, hit that subscribe button right there. We're really close to 10,000 subscribers. If everybody hits that button watching today, I'll hit it tomorrow. And if you want to join the Discord server, just go to discord.podrez.net or just click on the link in the description. We got about 200 people in there right now. We're going pretty strong. Alright, let's talk about the Coleco Chameleon. In 2015, a Kickstarter campaign was in the works for a new console called the Retro VGS. It was meant to cater to retro gamers that preferred an older style console with cartridges. This unit embraced the fact that there were no patches, no network connection required, and no DLC. On their website, they showcased games that were going to be compatible with this unit. They all looked like decent retro style games, so this might give you an idea of what the capabilities of the Retro VGS might have been. Speaking of capabilities, this console was planned to run on FPGA hardware, which would have been really cool. It would have made the console much easier to program for because you could essentially make an NES or Genesis homebrew title and then bring it over to the Retro VGS since FPGA is hardware emulation. This console looked like an Atari Jaguar, and there's a reason for that. The company behind the Retro VGS purchased the molding tool from Atari that made these shells. So it seems like a pretty innocent console, but there were some red flags about this thing. The first big problem was the Kickstarter. Now, in order to run a Kickstarter, you need a working prototype. But the Retro VGS didn't have one, so the Kickstarter campaign had to be moved over to IndeGoGo, where the requirements are more lenient. So yeah, there might have been some nice looking pictures of the unit, and the website gives you an idea of what you're getting, but this means absolutely nothing if you don't have a working model yet. The games that we talked about before are not running on the Retro VGS, they're running on other platforms like PC and Steam. Why weren't they able to make a working product, and who's gonna back this thing if it doesn't exist yet? Show me you can make the product and I'll donate. Another problem was the price. Originally they only wanted $150 for it, but then they increased it to $350. That's a lot of money considering what the proposed hardware was. This unit isn't going to be playing Xbox games, it's meant to play retro style games, so $350 for this is a bit too expensive. Another big problem is their promise to have glitch-free games with no patch updates. It might seem cool on paper that this console is cartridge only, but cartridges are an obsolete way to play games. They're expensive to produce, and it's impossible to promise glitch-free games. Even well-known titles like Super Mario Bros. Have glitches. And because there's no patch updates, none of the Retro VGS titles can be modified after release. They're acting like cartridges and no patch updates are a feature, but really, they're a hindrance. The IndeGoGo campaign did not go the way they wanted. It failed to meet its goal of $1,950,000. Instead, it was only able to raise $81,158, only 4% of what they wanted. I mean, like, what? Why did they need almost $2 million for something like this? And it's no surprise it wasn't funded. The company wasn't able to produce a real prototype, and it's way too expensive for what it is. If they dropped the price and showed this thing in action, maybe give us some gameplay footage, maybe people would have been willing to back this. Because of the lack of support, the company ended up discontinuing the Retro VGS. But shortly after, the team would resurrect this project with some very interesting changes and even a working prototype. Or is it? The team behind Retro VGS would revive the old project with some interesting changes, one of them being the name. They dropped Retro VGS in favor of the Coleco Chameleon. Yeah, that's right, the same Coleco that made the ColecoVision. So that same team is now involved in this? Not exactly. The team behind the now Chameleon bought the license to use the Coleco branding. Coleco Holdings, who no longer makes new products and simply exists to license out their name, allowed the use of the Coleco name for the Chameleon. They did the same thing with the Coleco Flashback by @Games. Coleco had nothing to do with this, they just allowed @Games to use their branding. Same thing with the Chameleon. Coleco is not a recognizable name anymore, so I'm not sure why they went through the trouble, but I do like the name better than the Retro VGS. But the best part about this new project, they actually have a working prototype that will be shown off at the 2016 New York Toy Fair. So now we're finally talking. This is what will make people back up your project, an actual working model. Except, there were some big red flags that people noticed about the prototype, and we have pictures from the Toy Fair that we can look at. The first bad sign, there's really not much you can see. All the other consoles around it are in the open, but the Chameleon itself is tucked away behind a piece of glass. You can see in this picture that the person is using a Super Nintendo controller, and this particular version of the Chameleon can only play Super Nintendo games. Also, notice you can't see where the controller is plugged into. Is it a USB port or something else? We don't know. In general, it seems like they didn't want people to scrutinize this too much, as if they had something to hide. Well, they certainly were hiding something. Here's the back of the console, where we can see the power and AV ports line up perfectly with a Super Nintendo. The power cord that the Chameleon was using is a third-party adapter that's also compatible with a Super Nintendo. And finally, the cartridge port looks very similar to the one on a Super Nintendo. And remember that earlier photo where a Super Nintendo controller was being used? If you can't tell what's going on, they placed a Super Nintendo inside of a Jaguar shell. This is not a prototype at all, and it's no wonder they tried to keep people from looking at the console too much. They're literally trying to pass off a Super Nintendo as their prototype. It seems like the company behind the Chameleon doesn't have the skill set to produce a working prototype. If they did, they probably would have made one. Doing this is very deceptive to the customer, especially those who backed the project. Imagine paying $350 to back up this console like they originally wanted, only to find out that this is what your money went towards. I certainly have no reason to donate at this point. I already own a Super Nintendo. Several YouTubers like Pat the NES Punk on the CU podcast were quick to call out the fake prototype and expose the company for what they tried to do. So anyway, how did the Coleco Chameleon team respond to all this? Well, you're not gonna believe it. With all the backlash about the fake prototype at the New York Toy Fair, the team behind the Coleco Chameleon responded. They acknowledged that people were suspicious about the inside of the unit, but rather than apologizing or admitting that it was just a Super Nintendo, they claimed they would provide pictures of the inside, proving that the prototype is legit. So there's a couple things that could happen here. Are they going to fake another prototype, or will they make a real prototype and claim that it was the original one the entire time? Well, sure enough, on their Facebook page, they posted this. Alright, so we do have a board inside of a translucent shell. Looks more convincing. I'm not sure why they couldn't just open the unit up and show us the board, but to me, this looks like a real prototype. Did they finally get it right? Nope. Some people on the Atari Age forums quickly found out that the board inside of the shell is just a capture card. It's not a console motherboard at all. They just took the board of an unrelated product and threw it in the shell, hoping that people would think it's real. So this is the second time they tried to fool us, and further proof that they don't have the resources to make this project a reality. Not only did consumers lose trust in the Chameleon, but so did Coleco Holdings. They would give the Chameleon team 7 days to produce a real prototype, but they failed to do so, so on March 8th, 2016, they announced that they were withdrawing their name from the project, which meant they could no longer use the Coleco name with the Chameleon. On that same day, the company behind the project would take their website and social media pages down. So it's official, the Coleco Chameleon was dead. So here's a good question. Was this project actually possible? And would it have been successful if it were released? On paper, the retro VGS seemed like a cool idea. I love retro consoles like the NES and Atari 2600, so it seemed neat. But patch updates and digital releases are all great things, and cartridges are honestly obsolete. It's really hard to spin those things otherwise. And it's unrealistic to promise a bug-free game because not even the top-selling retro games are bug-free. I don't think a lot of consumers would have bought this console if it existed unless they dropped the price and got some really good third-party developers involved. Could the team have made this project a reality? In my opinion, no. I really don't think they had the right team for that. Why do you think they faked 2 prototypes? Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.